with Zoom and recording. And because Zoom is so very popular, they have about 2.5-hour wait times. So we've sent in a few requests to Zoom, and I actually circled back with them today, and I'm trying to record this. I have indicated that I want to record it. Whether it's going to happen for us is a different thing altogether. That being said, our PDF slideshow will for sure be available on our website on the education page under DSEA, that home page. So we will have access to the PDF recording if we don't have the video recording available. It shows here that I'm recording. We'll see if that works out. With that, I want to go ahead and I'm going to stop here and see if I can go back. There we go. Okay, so welcome everybody. Happy Friday, and thank you for joining me for our next installment of our Teach series, our Teach workshops that we've been providing during shelter in place while we're all kind of stuck at home. We're still trying to do the work that we've always done by supporting you year-round, and from my perspective, with all things education related. Today's topic is about preparing for your IEP. I do want to be clear in that just based on so much feedback that we've had from multiple families, this workshop is not intended to talk about preparing for your IEP specific to shelter in place. We're all gearing back for what's going to look like some type of school year, and the fall will be soon approaching, and I think that parents are a little more nervous than ever, wanting to be prepared, feeling like there might be regression issues, not quite sure how to navigate an IEP via Zoom. Maybe some folks have missed certain assessments or feel like their kiddo hasn't had an opportunity to be properly assessed because assessment tools and strategies are a little bit different now that we're sheltered in place. And there's no one-size-fits-all solution for any of that. Therefore, it's difficult for me to help you navigate the IEP process, specifically based on shelter in place. That being said, I'm getting a lot of IEP requests, consult requests right now, and I want to go ahead and let you know that if there's anything from this general informative, informational standpoint that's not covering your needs or what you need specific to your child or your IEP that's coming up, the IEP process, etc., then I am scheduling IEP consults with our families so that we can take a more individualized look at what your needs are, your kiddo's specific placement, what your concerns are, your biggest questions, and so I'm more than happy, hi Larkin, welcome. I'm more than happy to address your specific needs. We can schedule either a Zoom or phone consult and give us an opportunity to really dive into your specific IEP, what's going on inside there, and I can help whether it's with navigating how to advocate for placement, whether it's really better understanding your child's IEP, or trying to create appropriate goals that are work for your kiddo's learning profile. I'm always available to help with that kind of stuff. So if you need more specific information for your kiddo and a more individualized support and consult, I'm here for that. You can see here my email address is elizabeth@dscba.org. Never hesitate to reach out to me. Our website, we have tons of information about, under our education tab on our website, so feel free to browse that as well. And we're always here for you to support you through this education process. We know it's not easy. So let's go ahead and take a look at our IEP. But what I notice is when I'm working with parents and I'm working with school teams on the IEP, there are certain things that really stick out to me. I think there are certain fundamentals that sometimes get looked over. And so when developing some of these slides, my goal is to make sure that you guys have that pertinent information. Make sure that you know what sections of the IEP are the pieces you should really be looking at and where you can actually advocate your own needs. And also the things that sometimes there's some things we just don't really know. The schools don't inform us about, certain rights or, your participation in the IEP process. Sometimes they don't know themselves. And so we've developed some strategies, some tools, and we just want to give you some content information so that you kind of know what to look for in your IEP. It'll help you better understand how to navigate it, better advocate for your child, and know what questions to ask and understand your rights in general. So without further hesitation, here we go. All right. So an IEP deconstructed basically is it's an individualized plan. It's based on professional evaluations and standardized assessments. So I think that's really important, especially if you are a new parent or caregiver and your kiddo is just now getting into the system and education system and district and getting these assessments. Just a second, got to let someone in here. Thank you for joining. So if you're just now in the infancy of that process, I have so many families that call and they're so disappointed because they feel that their child hasn't been assessed to their abilities. That, I know that my kiddo knows so much more, but yet all of these test results show that my kid fails in everything. And it's very discouraging. And unfortunately, our assessment, the way that we assess all students is kind of broken. We have a very formal, rigid, and standardized assessment process, and it's based on, typically developing students. It's very standardized to very strict guidelines. And so our kiddos, as well as a lot of kiddos that might have different learning abilities or different challenges in the way they learn, don't always test well. So I just want to make sure that you realize that when you get these assessments back and you're meeting with your IEP team for the first time or the second time, and they're like, hey, this is the, poor, very below average, just prepare yourself that you're going to hear a lot of that, but understand that that's because the assessment process is it's kind of broken. It just doesn't really meet the needs of all learners, and something that needs to be addressed. So anyway, I want you to know that. So those goals then are developed, right, based on these assessments and these evaluations done by the professionals. And so sometimes it may feel like the goals aren't always accurate. You may feel like your kiddo does have a better grasp on certain content. The IEP provides information about placement, so that's a big one. Obviously, goals that we're going to be working toward and need to make appropriate progress with. The different supports and services that are going to be put in place to help the student achieve those goals. It's going to list certain accommodations and modifications that will help support your student. And then any additional input, notes from the family or the education team. So it should be a pretty holistic document that has this whole plan in place. And so with that, the students are expected to make appropriate progress with these goals in order to participate in their current placement. I know a lot of you guys probably struggle with your education team's concern that the student is not making appropriate progress. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that as well, to make sure that goals are smart and that they're appropriate. So the IEP teams meet yearly. Now, obviously, you have the right to request an IEP at any time, or if the school feels that they need to meet with you to discuss something new or address a specific concern or issue, then you can meet more frequently. And then new, more thorough evaluations and assessments are done every 3 years. That's the triennial. Whoops, sorry. But yeah, we just want to make sure, do you know that you are an equal part of the IEP team? So you have every right to request any type of placement, supports that are needed, services. You have the right to help create goals, to request certain accommodations or modifications, anything that you believe will help your student, your child, access the curriculum and make appropriate progress toward goals. So one thing we always one thing we always say is you can request a Cadillac, right? But you're only guaranteed a Chevy. So when we talk about FAPE, you know, it's free, appropriate public education. And so we want to make sure that the schools are required to give you that dependable Chevy, right? That gets you from point A to point B, but they can't promise you the moon. So when I say that you have the right to request anything, you do. But we do want to make sure that your requests are reasonable. But when it comes to like placement, when it comes to supports, if you want a one-on-one aid in a general education classroom setting, you have every right to request that. So I just want to make sure you guys know that no matter what the school thinks, no matter what the assessment determined or the evaluation determined, you have the right to request what you think is best for your student, your child. If you feel that your child is not receiving appropriate services and supports, you can request an IEP meeting at any time. I included here California Special Ed Law website. It gives you all the timelines. So it gets pretty confusing when you're trying to navigate an IEP and you're trying to document things. This particular website gives you a breakdown of when you request an IEP, how long, you know, will it be before you can expect, or what are the requirements to get a response and schedule a date with your IEP team, all of those different turnarounds. And it's always good to kind of have that handy so that you can kind of visualize the timeline you're working with and make sure that everyone is in compliance with the law. All right. Be prepared. So now that we kind of know, right, we've got this IEP, this is my kiddo's going to be is going to have an IEP. We're going to be working, you know, with an individualized education program for his or her educational journey. So it's really important to really start familiarizing yourselves. You are your kiddo's best advocate. And no one else is going to fight for an appropriate education more than you're going to. And so it's important to be as prepared as you can. Know the law, understand ADA, understand IDEA, understand the Every Student Succeeds Act. These are all, sorry, I'm admitting someone, come on in. Okay. The law is what is going to protect you and your kiddo and give you the opportunity for your child to have to be educated in the least restrictive environment, to receive all appropriate supports and services to help that child succeed in the classroom. So it's important to familiarize yourselves. Rights Law is awesome. It's an awesome resource. They do tons of workshops, tons of educational series. And if you're local here in the Bay Area, DREDF is a really great resource as well. That's DREDF, DREDF. They do tons of workshops and specifically on IEP law, navigating your IEP, and they're pretty easy to digest. It's a lot of information, and they've been able to streamline it into those digestible chunks that that help you, empower you to understand what you can be fighting for, requesting at these IEPs. It's very important to know your child's present levels, have a good understanding of what your kiddo can do. You want to know your current goals, and you want to know the scope of services and supports that are currently being provided to your child. So having that clear foundation of what's happening right now with your kiddo. We encourage everyone to develop a vision statement. So if you walk into an IEP meeting and you kind of don't really know what you want for your kiddo, then the more likely you're going to feel a little overwhelmed and not quite sure how to loop back or circle back to what you're looking for, what you need. And so I always try to encourage parents to think about their kiddo's educational journey. What are you looking for? At the end of the day, are you focused on making sure that, academics are highest priority and that you want to receive the supports and services that are going to help your kiddo, be as competent with academics as possible? Do you want your kiddo to have more, access, obviously, to the academics and mastery over certain skills, but are you really concerned with the socialization piece? Do you want your child to be educated alongside typical peers? We do know that evidence supports that kiddos who are educated alongside typical peers tend to have better outcomes. And so, you know, if inclusion and having your kiddo educated in a general ed placement is a huge concern for you because you want that socialization piece, you want you know, typical peers modeling and certain behaviors, and you want them to gain that social emotional learning and socialization through working with typical peers, that needs to be something that you think about, right? So really think, what do you want for your child? What are your goals? When you have that vision, and it doesn't have to be this long vision statement, but if you have those streamlined, those few kind of like bullet pointed goals that you want for your kiddo, that's going to help you lead that discussion, so that if they veer from that vision, if they say, if your vision is to have your kiddo in an inclusive classroom setting and to be educated alongside typical peers in a general ed placement to the maximum extent possible, then talk about moderate to severe placement doesn't need to last, right? You can use that vision statement to try to circle it back to your vision and see, now what can we do to work together to accomplish this vision. That's why it's important. Always make sure that you have your questions and concerns ready. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that as we go into kind of the paperwork of the IEP and the pages that you should really focus on and make sure that you're covering at the meetings. Document everything. There are some great places online. I know understood.com has been a really great resource when it comes to like IEPs, and they have like an easy to create IEP binder. It takes you through the whole process. You can print the stuff out, and it gives you a nice little handy binder that you can document your phone calls, your requests, current services or changes, etc. And so having a one spot, an organized spot where you keep all of your information is really valuable, because you can always look back, see what happened, and be able to document that process. So that's always good to do, to stay organized. And we'll talk a little bit more about that, but you always have the right to record your IEP meeting as well. A lot of times there might be a spouse who can't participate in the IEP meeting, and you may just want to kind of revisit all of the pieces that were said, because an IEP meeting can be a little bit nerve-wracking, and we can feel a little overwhelmed and get nervous and aren't quite sure if we said everything we needed to say. So requesting to record the IEP meeting is not a problem at all. And I think you just have to give them 24 hours notice, and it's just another way to document what's going on. And then finally, just remember, a positive attitude goes a long way. I know it's tough, especially if you've been going through this. This isn't your first IEP. If you've been going through it and you feel like a broken record, and you feel like things just aren't, there's a breakdown in communication, and you feel like your team's not necessarily doing the things that, you know, you'd hope that they would be doing, or that you agreed to in the last IEP, et cetera, et cetera. This is a common, you know, challenge for our parents. But I tell you what, just coming from the perspective of someone who's working with families and also working with schools, parents who try to stay calm, try to stay open-minded and respectful in communication, and who also empathize, or able to empathize with their education teams, understanding that they don't just have one student, that they're trying to manage an entire classroom. They may not have experience working with a child with disabilities in their particular classroom, or a child with Down syndrome specifically, and just really trying not to wear that adversarial hat. We want to make sure the team knows we're here to support, you're here to support them. You understand that this is a challenge, and you want to do what you can so that you guys can meet in the middle and create a nice, balanced, healthy relationship, because at the end, it's only going to benefit your child. And when I deal with education teams that they've just had it and they're pulling out their hair, and because they don't have a healthy communication with the family, and the kiddo kind of pays the price for it. So I just want you to be mindful about that. Well, I'm letting in another participant. Come on in. All right. So navigating the IEP. So now that we've kind of prepped you with some things to be mindful about when you're going into the IEP, we recognize that it's a lot. IEP is a lot. There's a lot of information there, and it can definitely become pretty overwhelming and confusing pretty quickly. And so we're going to take a look at some key content in the IEP that we want our families to always be mindful of. Make sure when you're looking at your IEP, you're checking out these particular pages, this content, because this is when your equal participation as an IEP team member can really come in handy. All right, so parent input. So this is a huge piece and something that sometimes, it gets overlooked. Now, all IEPs are slightly different, unfortunately. And so you don't always find the content on the exact same pages. So we try not to be too specific about it, but a lot of times we can find the parent input section on the first couple of pages, within the first couple of pages of the IEP. So you want to use the concerns of parent relevant to educational progress section. And you can go ahead and start thinking of those things. What are your concerns? What's going on that you have questions about? What's not happening that's concerning you? So you can type it up ahead of time just to make sure that you've got your thoughts organized. Obviously make sure that if inclusion is something that's in your vision statement, that you are letting them know, but at the same time, you can bring up any concern you have, any question or concern at all that's in your head, because this is an opportunity to document that on the IEP. If you have a concern and you have it documented on the IEP, then it is your school team's job to address that concern. It's all documented. So here are just a couple of examples. One, parent feels it's important that Will be educated alongside his typically developing peers, as he benefits greatly from observing and interacting with them. So we've got that noted. Here is, I'm going to do this. This is a more detailed response. Our main priority is for Kate to be educated alongside her typical peers in the least restrictive environment, with the appropriate accommodations, modifications, and supports. We are concerned that the recommendations from the AACT report have not been implemented. We would like the recommendations to be implemented and documented on this IEP. We requested by email that we receive all progress reports and draft goals 1 week prior to this IEP meeting, but did not receive them, and therefore are concerned that our meaningful participation in this meeting has not been facilitated appropriately. So you can see here, this is a far more detailed concern and far more detailed input. But when I tell you, you can say what you need to say, and the more detailed you get about it, get with it, then the more input they're going to have from you. And again, that's what they're going to have to address. So just think about that, because those are some examples of ways to really share and be detailed about all of your thoughts going on with your kiddo's education. So the special factors page, this is definitely something to take a look at. I talk with a lot of families who have kiddos with very limited expressive communication, that have low motor tone, and that hypotonia really impacts their ability to participate in like writing exercises, handwriting assignments, etc. And so when we're taking a look at that, we want to make sure again that our kiddos have access and opportunity to participate meaningfully. If you can't communicate, you're not going to be able to participate meaningfully. If a physical disability impacts your ability to write, you're not going to be able to participate and show your understanding and show, express your knowledge if that physical disability is hindering your ability to do so. So with that, you have the ability to request AAC and AT eval. So does your child require assistive technology and devices or services? A lot of our kiddos do. So if so, that box should be checked. And there should be a description included as to why your kiddo does require assistive technology or services. You want to make sure that if so, that the AAC or AT devices and services that are required are either documented on the special factors page, the FAPE page, or in the notes. You just want to make sure it's documented. Again, if it's not on the IEP, then we're not going to be bound to it, and the education team does not have to then respond to that or be held accountable for that. So being detail oriented and making sure that we're addressing those concerns on the IEP is very important. If your child currently has never had an AAC or AT evaluation, if your child has limited expressive language skills, if your child has significant fine motor challenges, this is something that you should consider. You can ask for an AAC evaluation. A lot of times with our kiddos, it's not a big deal because a lot of them do struggle with that expressive communication piece and do struggle with the fine motor challenges. So if they have difficulty writing, you can ask for an AT eval. Generally, we don't do that until the end of first grade, at least, because we're all developing our motor skills, right? And so at that point, you can really show, that, hey, my kiddo has a lot of abilities, but handwriting is a big challenge. So having access to a device that will allow him to choose from a word bank, use his fingers to touch, use a device to help him access that curriculum or that goal or that content, is appropriate. So hopefully all of that makes sense. You can request an eval, and again, with our kiddos, we tend not to have a huge problem with that, getting that taken care of. So goals are a big one. And kind of going back to a little bit earlier when we talked about goals and having to make appropriate progress. That's really important. We want to make sure that the goals that we have for our kiddos are appropriate. A lot of times education teams will develop goals based on that assessment, and they may or may not be appropriate for your kiddo. But our goals drive services, right? So, when we're creating, if your kiddo has expressive communication challenges, then we're going to need to have some good speech goals there. And because we have speech goals, we're going to need speech services, so on and so forth. Fine motor, right? Because we've got fine motor goals, we're going to need OT services. So goals drive services, and you want to make sure they're appropriate to your kiddo's needs. It's hard to say how many goals should be on your child's IEP. I get that question a lot, like how many goals in each area of content, how many goals total. So what we try to do is just kind of create a general outline or idea as to what you could kind of just, I guess, kind of a foundation from which you can build or take away as far as goals are concerned. But I do want to make sure that we're clear on a few things here. So with speech, you can see here as an example, you may have 3 or 4 speech goals. We're addressing receptive language, we're addressing expressive language, and we're addressing articulation. Now, speech is something that most, if not all of our kiddos have at one point or another, work with an SLP, or may work with a feeding therapist, oral motor therapist to build those muscles and to help with articulation and intelligibility. That being said, a speech goal is a therapeutic goal. It is not, now some with our receptive language skills, understanding content, that's another piece. But when it comes to expressive language, intelligibility, articulation, those things are developmental goals, but they should never impact your child's ability to participate in an inclusive environment or a general education environment. because that's not an academic goal. So I just want to make sure that everyone understands that. The same with fine motor. We can address those fine motor challenges by having some fine motor goals, whether that's a handwriting goal or a self-help, buttoning, zipping, lacing goal, etc. But again, this is fine motor. It should never impact your kiddo's ability to participate in a general ed classroom setting. Again, this is as a result of a physical disability, hypotonia, and no kiddo, based on a physical disability should ever be denied an opportunity to participate and continue to advance and make progress in an educational setting. Now, gross motor is exactly the same. So when we get into reading, math, writing, and you can see here, writing is expressive writing, not handwriting. We have some ideas about how many goals you should have or could develop for each of those. The reading, the math, and the writing, and then you see here with the social studies and science, those are all working toward academic goals, and our kiddos do need to make appropriate progress with those goals in order to maintain their current placement, in order to show that they are making progress and they can continue where they are with their placement. Of course, we've got to make sure that those goals are appropriate, right? And that they do complement and work with the student's learning profile. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that. But this just gives you some ideas about how many goals you might be looking at for each one. I would like to just kind of touch on the social studies science because I think this is really cool. I took this from my colleague who has a son who's been participating in general education his whole life, and we're wanting to talk about kind of some specifics. So you'll see here with Liam, like with social studies and science, he was able to, his mom was able to work with the education team to really develop a very specific goal. For each classroom science and social studies unit of study, Liam will learn one key concept and 6 key vocabulary words by answering a fill-in-the-blank question for the key concept with word bank provided, so he's got options there, and matching the words to pictures for the vocabulary. So now we have a very clear idea of what Liam's doing with every unit of study. We know there's going to be one key word or concept, 6 vocabulary words attached to that, and we're going to have pictures and fill in the blank and multiple choice because we're modifying that to help him achieve that goal. Here's another very specific goal. Using assistive technology with word prediction software, Liam will write a sentence with at least 5 words to describe a picture related to grade level science or social studies curriculum with 80% accuracy in 2 to 3 opportunities. Again, we're naming the what he's doing, how he's doing it, what's going to be provided in order to help him accomplish that goal, and how often we want to see it. How it can be measured. So these are some great ideas about how to be really specific with the goals and how to work with your team to create a goal that is SMART. And we're going to get into what SMART goals look like. You see here at the bottom, behavior and social skills goals. So if you already have a behavior intervention plan, or if you've done a functional behavior analysis, behavior and social skills goals should for sure be on your IEP. Otherwise, how are we going to know if our kiddos are making progress? Here is some more information regarding goals. So when creating the goals, you want to work with your team. Look at the state standards for that grade level. Now, actually, in California, you can look up curriculum connectors, and they've already done the work for you. So if you get on the Department of Education, and you just Google Department of Education curriculum connectors, they've actually taken state standards for each goal, and they've they've worked it in and modified it into like two other phases, so two other tiers, if you will. So this is the state standard, and then here's the state standard slightly modified for a particular ability or learning profile, and then here's one even further modified. So they've created goals based on the fact that there are kiddos who are working on individualized plans, and that kind of gives you those connectors. So if our kiddos are at this time not working at grade level and would have a difficult time achieving this particular state standard, we can still connect it, right, to that curriculum. We can still connect it to the key, to the core content, so that we know our kiddos are working toward, you know, the same goals, but just at their learning level for their individualized plan. Make sure that you have a good understanding about present levels. And this is something that you may have to fight for at the IEP meeting. We always tell parents, document, document, document. So if your teacher says, Will has only shown that he recognizes 5 letters of the alphabet. But at home, you see that Will knows every letter of the alphabet, capital and lowercase, can identify them in random sequences, or, you know, out of place, can put them in back in sequenced order, you know, can sound out the letters. If you know that your child that has abilities that are not being reflected in the goals based on those standardized assessments, then it's your job to advocate for, you know, better and more appropriate goals. And you can do that by videoing your kiddo, you know, trying to document, having, you know, make a sight word list, and when you're doing sight word flashcards, you know, checking off what you're seeing that they understand consistently, but having as much documentation and video, etc., of your kiddo and present levels is really helpful when you're advocating for SMART goals. We want the goal to be SMART, so we want it to be specific based on the student's present levels of academic achievement. We want to make sure that we understand this kiddo and what this kiddo knows in order to create a very specific goal, like the one we read with Liam, right? Measurable. So we definitely need to make sure that we can measure the progress. We can't, if a kiddo has an FBA and there's not a behavior goal on the IEP, and then we hear back from the team that says behavior is a huge problem and we've got to move this kiddo out of general education into mild to moderate because behaviors are off the chain. Well, if you don't have those goals and you're not able to measure them and you're not able to see what kind of progress is being made, then you're not going to be able to advocate for, you know, for the school actually to take responsibility and show you how they are helping this kiddo with behavior. Achievable. So we want it to be realistic, obviously related to the most critical needs. We don't want goals that are just, we want our kiddos to have a productive challenge. We want to hold them to high standards. We definitely want to presume competence, I'm sorry. But we also want to make sure that these goals are achievable. We want our kiddos to experience success and continue to build their skills. We want them to be results oriented. The goal will clearly state what your child will do to accomplish that. If we revisit our last slide with Liam, you see here, we've got all of the information here to know, like we know that he's going to use assistive technology with word prediction software in order to achieve the goal that he's working on. And so it's okay to include as many details about that kind of stuff as possible. The more detailed we are and specific, the easier it's going to be to track and to manage, and everyone's going to be on the same page because we're all literally speaking the same language and understanding the approach, the goal, their current skill set, how we're going to measure it, etc. Can this goal be worked on in a general ed setting? It's always important to understand, like, okay, can we do this in gen ed? If so, why not? Why not do it there? And again, we don't want it to be too difficult because lack of progress could result in a more restrictive placement. So we want to make sure those goals are achievable. accommodations and modifications. All of our kiddos need these things. And so if you, if you have an IEP, then there should certainly be some accommodations and modifications written into that IEP. Here are just some examples. Obviously accommodations, we're just changing the how our student accesses, right? So our student is accessing the same content as his peers. It's just, he may access it a little bit differently. We can change how he accesses that learning, how he accesses the curriculum. So you can edit the font and materials. You can utilize devices to help you access the content. You can use a scribe or read aloud. I'm letting someone else in. She must have got kicked out. Text-to-speech generators, etc. With modifications, we are changing the what, right? It's not the same. We can actually provide an alternative grading system. We can modify the activities. We can modify the science and social studies tests. We can have it that they're sent home a week prior to the test to review and to practice. Our kiddos could actually have access to that content before they have to take a class or a test in the classroom. We modify the content to make sure that it's at that child's learning level. You can use alternative spelling words aligned to the phonics goal, etc. So we're changing the what's being learned when we're making modifications. All right, let's go here. So just some things to remember as you're advocating for your kiddo. For a child that's spending any amount of time in or with a general education classroom, we want to make sure that child has an assigned general ed classroom teacher, that the child is included in the general ed class picture in the yearbook, that as parents, you guys are included in all of the communication, whether that's newsletters, field trip info, emails from the room mom, etc. We want to be invited to the general ed back to school night, meet with the special ed, also meets with special ed in their room, but you want to make sure that you're being included in all things general education. If your kiddo is spending any amount of time in the gen ed classroom, your kiddo has the right to participate in all of those same activities. So you just want to make sure you're advocating for that, and that you're talking with your IEP team to make sure that that's something you want, that communication, that healthy communication and involvement and inclusion at your school. So those are things you can talk about at the IEP meeting as well. Homeschool communication is really important. So we talked about the Chevy versus the Cadillac, right? It's not reasonable to say, I said you can request anything you want, but it would be difficult for a teacher to provide a daily journal of everything that went on with your child at school every single day, especially when she's trying to manage a classroom of 23 other kids. But I think that talking about homeschool communication at your IEP meeting and creating a plan that feels manageable for the entire team is what's important. You can say, especially for you families who have kids who are participating in general ed, saying, I want to help you help my kiddo, right? So continuity and consistency and repetition are really important for my child. So by having a healthy and consistent homeschool communication plan, I can continue to work on the activities that we're working on. I can address some of the challenges that we're facing at school. I have a better understanding about what's going on. Since my child cannot expressively communicate all of the different things that his peers can communicate from a day in school, it's really helpful for me to have an understanding about how that day went or how that week went, whatever is working for your home, with the home and the education team. Again, it needs to be manageable. We can't expect the Cadillac, but we can request the Chevy. And again, letting the school know it's because you want to help support them. And by understanding what's going on with your kiddo at school, you're going to be able to better do that. And again, when you work out these details at the IEP meeting, you can document it all. And so at that point, if the gen ed teacher says, sure, I can work with the aide and special ed, and we can send home, weekly communication, and we can send home the tests that are going to be next week, or we can let you know what, I can give you extra copies of some of the homework so you can practice them every day at school. These are these are some things you can actually address in the IEP meeting, and they can document it. And at that point, they're held accountable to making sure that that homeschool communication is happening. Before you sign your IEP, make sure that you understand everything that's happening. We always encourage folks, if you have any questions at all, if you are not 100% satisfied with what went on at the IEP, you want to make sure that you take it home and review it. Don't sign it. At that point, you can either sign it or you can request changes within 1 week. That's why we always suggest recording it. That way you can get home again, you can take a look over it, you can listen to the recording, and then you can really start to generate like specific questions or saying, yeah, no, that's not going to work for me. I think that this is what I want. You can start writing down those changes. You have that time. It is, a respectful choice to try to get that information back to them as soon as possible. So look at a week, right? So if you finish that IEP meeting, think, okay, I've got a week to really take a look at this, fine tune it, and work with my team to figure out, the best plan for my child. You want to make sure that you're checking the offer of FAPE and the services page. You want to see what accommodations are on there, what modifications are on there, what special education and related services are on there. Make sure that all of those services, that information, those key details are documented, that they are in your IEP, because then again, there's no accountability there. So you want to make sure those details are listed. Obviously, the offer of FAPE, they're going to let you, that placement, you want to make sure you agree with the placement. That's something you're comfortable with. If you don't agree with the placement, that is okay. You have every right to request a different type of placement for your child. One thing that Lori, my colleague, and I have always talked about is that really, when you think about it, first placement discussion should always be general ed. If you've been to our workshop about modifications and accommodations, we talk a lot about inclusion, and we talk about special education. And special education consists of services and supports to help your child succeed. Special education does not have to be a different classroom setting. It does not have to be a location. And so if you feel that your child would benefit most from being in a general ed placement setting, you can start there and work from there. So I want my child in general ed. What supports and services do we need, including a one-on-one aid if needed, including appropriate modifications and accommodations, including probably some pull out and push in services by the specialists. What do we need to make that work? And then if that doesn't work after we've done our due diligence to create an inclusive environment for a child, for your child in that classroom setting with all of those supports and services in place, if that's still not allowing your child to access the curriculum and to make appropriate progress, then you can have a discussion about an alternative placement. That's not for everybody. I have a lot of families who feel very comfortable in their SDC classes. I have a lot of families who really feel that full inclusion is the best choice for their family. So it's very individualized, and that's something for you to think about. And when you develop your vision statement, something to keep in mind. But I always try to think of it that way, right? We always are saying, this is what can your child do? And let's take a look at our abilities, and not like he can't do this, so therefore he can't be in this classroom. How can we support your child to be in this setting? So just keep that in mind as well. You want to know the percentage of time your child's going to be in and out of general classes, the activities that are going to support the transition, and then again, notes. Always make sure that you have in those notes everything you want in those notes, because then the school is accountable to addressing those concerns and issues. So we're getting back into the fall, and I think that more than ever, it's going to be important for you guys to communicate as much as you can with your fall team. I know that for most kiddos, transitioning this fall is going to be pretty difficult. And for our kiddos, it might be even more challenging. So having that respectful, healthy homeschool communication and being proactive, informed, and prepared for your kiddos' fall school year is going to be super helpful. So we always suggest providing the school team with a goals at a glance, and that's a streamlined page of your child's IEP goals in nice, easy to read format that really gives your team that visual of what we're working on. The more familiar we all are with those specific goals, then the better chance we're going to be able to incorporate activities that are working toward those goals every day and give that kiddo more access and opportunity to achieve the goals and to demonstrate appropriate progress. A one-page profile is always really good. It puts a face to the name, and for our kiddos, because there are sensitivities, because we have some sensory challenges, we have that expressive, receptive communication gap. And we might have, and obviously, right, with communication, our kiddos may not always be able to express their needs, their wants, their ideas. And so by having a one-page profile, we're giving our education teams just a little more insight into not only the student they're going to have, but the person. It's going to help them understand a little bit more about their motivators, their biggest strengths, things that make them feel happy and comforted, the things they have in common with their typical peers that we can use as a discussion point to help facilitate friendships. It's also important for the team to understand the big challenges. Are there some sensitivities? What makes this kiddo scared? What might make this kiddo feel overwhelmed? What's something that just simply is not a good idea for this kiddo because, you know, of certain sensitivities or sensory challenges or communication challenges, etc. Having those available, it's really important. It helps literally get everybody on the same page. We always, recommend adding a cover letter. You provide your information. Let your team know you're there as support. You're there as part of that equal piece of the IEP team. You are there to help them support your child. You can always ask the teacher or case manager for a copy of the child's weekly schedule. It's important to understand what's going on. Make sure it matches what the IEP says. You want to make sure that your minutes, that the minutes they're getting that are on the IEP is actually what's happening. And I know we have a lot of families that go through that challenge. And if that is something that's a challenge for you, if you have minutes on your IEP, let's say general ed time, and they are not spending nearly that much time in their general ed placement, then that's something that we can talk about, and I can give you further assistance, more individualized assistance with that to try to navigate that with the team, because they are out of compliance if they're not doing that. And that's something that needs to be brought to their attention sooner than later. I've just, again, taking from Lori here, I took a couple of examples here. So to the left, we've got Liam's profile page. So it's kind of his all about me, and you can see that we have his vision statement, so it's giving a personalized point of view from Liam, his strengths, what doesn't work, things he loves, what works, and what he's actually working on. So maybe some of his emerging skills. And this is just going to help the education team, again, put that face with the name and really get to know their student a little bit better. And then to the right is just an example of that IEP at a glance, just a one-page printout of IEP goals. Now, some things to remember. You can utilize your IEP meeting to determine the who, the what, the when, the where, the why, and the hows of your child's special education plan. What I mean about this is that it's okay to say, okay, my child is not working at grade level. We're moving into third grade. I know that there's a learning gap. I know that he's reading at a kindergarten or a first grade level. We understand that he needs modifications. We've got here on the IEP that there will be modifications to the work. Who's going to be doing the modifications? There is no problem with you asking that question. Do you know how many schools I've visited and talked with education teams and IEP teams, and they have no idea how to answer that question? When I say, okay, who's doing the modifying? And there's no accountability there. It's not recorded, it's not documented in any way, and what we see is that kiddos are being sent home with work that's not modified, or they're in class clearing tables and hiding under desks because no one has a clear idea about who's modifying and how to modify. The aide might be doing something, the para may be trying to modify on the spot but doesn't necessarily have the training or consult time, and so now we're going to get behaviors, we're going to get frustrations from our kiddos. We may not see appropriate progress because the demand is inappropriate. So that's a key concern, especially if you have a child participating in general ed. So make sure when you're at that meeting, you're not afraid to ask those questions. My child has the right to modifications and accommodations. Who will be doing that? And then everyone's going to have a clear understanding of the expectation. And then there's accountability there. Make note of that. We talked about alternate grading systems. I have so many teachers that send our kids home with failures because they're grading toward, the standards. And our kiddos are working on modified work because they have an IEP, and yet they're coming home with zeros or, zeros or ones instead of threes or Fs instead of As. And because teachers are not grading based on their modified work and their output. So that's another thing that you can talk about at the IEP meeting. How are we going to grade our kiddo? Who's going to do the grading? How's it going to be done? And we have the right to an alternative grading format because my child has an IEP. So that leads us to the next couple of points here. So your child does not need to be working at grade level in order to participate in general education. I've been at IEP meetings myself where our family's fighting for general ed placement. They're already in it and they want to stay there, and the team is fighting to get them in mild to moderate, SDC. And then I've even had situations where the 3rd or 4th grade teacher comes in and then explains to the parents how hard that class is going to be, basically letting them know, hey, your kid's not going to know or understand anything because we're doing this, this, and this. All of this content is super complex. There's a huge gap between 2nd grade content and 3rd grade content, and I just want to let you know your student's going to be so overwhelmed. They're not going to be able to do the same work as their peers in the classroom. And guess what? That's okay. So then you say, well, that's fine because my kiddo can have modified work, and this teacher and you are going to collaborate to do the modifications, and now that's on the IEP. And he's going to be graded based on a portfolio of work, not based on tests or quizzes because he doesn't test or quiz well. Or my student or my kiddo can be graded and have an opportunity to retake tests. Or my kiddo can be graded in a different format, given multiple choice, right or wrong, true or false. There are lots of different ways that you can be flexible and work with a modified grading approach and a modified testing approach, etc. So those are questions that need to be addressed at the IEP meeting that I can't tell you, countless families and education teams just kind of look over and glaze over, and then you get into the heart of the school year and everyone's feeling really discouraged because modifications aren't happening, grades are poor, and it's just looking like the student's not making the right progress. So at a certain point, you will need to decide whether your child is on diploma track and that you want to get them there. That has to happen by freshman year of high school. So once you get into high school and you're a freshman, because colleges need certain standards in order for you to your student to be able to be apply and be admitted into certain schools. Starting freshman year, you have to in order to be on diploma track, you're required to complete all the grade level assignments, the tests, the quizzes. You can still have accommodations. So if you need it in a different format, or you need to change the how of getting there to be able to show that you know the same material and the same content, you can still have accommodations because that's just changing the how, but you can no longer change the what. So at that point, that your child starting freshman year of high school would be required to complete all of those grade level standard assignments, testing, exit exams, etc. And I think that's important to think about and consider. If you do choose that, if the gap is really wide and you're thinking, look, I do want my child to have an opportunity to, gain the social experiences of being in high school with his typical peers, to also be able to master certain skills that are going to give him the life skills he needs to navigate the world around him when he graduates, and also the ability to move on to a college, to secondary education. You may want to consider getting a certificate or an alternative diploma. That would give your kiddo an opportunity to still participate with his peers and be able to kind of go through school with the same peers, get that socialization, meet and work toward his own education, own individualized education goals, and again, learn those life skills, feel like a valued member of his community and his classroom. And then when he graduates with that alternative diploma or certificate, would still be eligible for those transitional services that are provided by like regional center until he's 22. So those are things that you need to consider. And everyone has a different idea about, what they want for their child. And when your child's at a certain age, I think it would be important to include your kiddo in that conversation as well. What do you want? What are your life goals? Help them create their own vision statement so that they can start advocating for themselves as well. So with that, I believe that is our last page. It is. I'll just do that. And so I'm going to take a look and see. It looks like we might have some questions. Can you post the website for the curriculum connectors? I can do that. Yeah, Larkin, I'll do that. I can send that in an email to the folks who registered today. Yes, Carolyn, the PowerPoint will be on the website. Let's see. Gen Ed and inclusion is not available or offered in TK. Yes, Kirsten, that is my experience. To be quite honest with you guys, and this is why I think it's really important, and why Lori and I always try to encourage folks to think about this as starting in general ed and going from there, because when education teams see Down syndrome as the disability listed on the paperwork, the knee-jerk reaction is SDC. And it's unfortunate. I wish that weren't the case, but they immediately think, oh, this kid has a significant intellectual disability, a physical disability, and so the automatic placement most of the time, unless a parent's advocating, then it's always, it's SDC. And then you have to try to advocate why SDC doesn't have to be the starting point for your child. And again, general ed placement is appropriate for every child with the supports and services in place, and the schools are required to they have to provide those supports and those services with full fidelity before they can ever make another recommendation or ever push you into a placement that you're not comfortable with. They have to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that they've implemented all of these supports and services with full fidelity. They've done their due diligence, and the student is still not making appropriate progress. Transition from 5th to middle school. So the Thibodeau crew, if you guys would like to send, just so that we can connect with your specific needs. I think you joined us a little bit later, but I did want to let you guys know I'm available to schedule IEP consults so that we can really take a look at your kiddo, your placement, your specific questions, and kind of dissect your IEP. But I am available for consult with that. And of course, that's a free service we offer to all of our members without trying to dig in too much into into everyone's specific concerns while we've got everyone hanging on here. So please feel free to email me at elizabeth@dscba.org, and we can schedule kind of a one-on-one consult and talk a little bit more in detail about your needs. Yes. Okay, Carolyn. Yeah. So I'll send everyone the connectors. It's super handy to have, and I don't even know that a lot of education teams are very familiar with it. But again, it does some of the work for you, and it can help you align those goals with your education teams and really connect them to those core standards. Yeah, so I'll email those to everybody that attended today, and that way you'll have that information. Any other questions from anybody else? It looks like we don't have anything here. Anything else? So with that, I appreciate you guys hanging in there. We're running a few minutes behind. So if we don't have any more questions, I hope that this was a helpful workshop to better understand. Oh, it never fails, does it? Let's see here. Oh, thank you. Well, you're very welcome. I think that it's just really helpful to know those key pieces that sometimes we overlook, or we don't realize we have, so much say, and that we can really be an equal part of that IEP team, as long as you understand your rights, your student, and students' current levels and abilities, and that you advocate for, that least restrictive placement for your kiddo. Let's see, we've got a few more. Make sure we don't have any. Okay, thank you guys so much. I really appreciate it, and I won't keep you any longer. Again, we will not be holding a workshop next Friday, but we will be back after that, and we'll, of course, as always, we'll keep you posted through our emails to let you know what's coming up next. In the meantime, everyone have a really lovely weekend. We appreciate your participation in our workshops. Always feel free to let us know if there's something that you'd like to hear about or learn more about. You can always email me at elizabeth@dscba.org, and I'd be happy to help you out any way I can. Thanks so much, guys. Appreciate you, and we'll see you next time.